Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 24, I believe, of the Natural Female Muscle Podcast. Today, we are back with another solo episode from myself, and we're going to discuss bodybuilding alongside university, which I'm really, really excited to talk about. I think this is a topic that I can obviously share a lot on based on my own experience with this. It's something that I tend to obviously talk a lot about with clients, and also I get a lot of questions about it on Instagram too. I feel like it's probably one of the most common things to go alongside bodybuilding, because I was thinking I could talk a little bit about school, but there's very, very few people who are bodybuilding while still at school. And I know it's way more applicable for me to talk more so about the university aspects, because that's also not just necessarily like when you're that 18 to 22, 23 range. It can even be, later on in life. So I feel like it's a really good one to go through. I did actually do like a lecture on this as well at MBW, but I know that not everyone who listens to this will be a part of MBW. Might be something definitely worth looking into. But even still, that's more of a lecture. And this is something that I want to go into in a bit more of like a friendly, just chit chat, talking through, giving you my thoughts and running through that one. So yeah, really excited to get into that today. Anyone who's watching on the video will be quite proud of me. I just realized as I sat down, this is the first time that I think I've really like done a recording not wearing black. So that's a huge win for me, because it's very, very rare that I wear anything moderately colourful. I'm not exactly wearing colour, I'm wearing beige, but I think that I'll take the win on that one today. I think that's a win for me. But yeah, we'll get into the conversation. I think the biggest thing to start with on this one is to just understand that it's not silly to be worried about maybe starting uni or just bodybuilding whilst you're at uni. Maybe you've made the decision to start bodybuilding or prepping, and you're kind of just maybe feeling a little bit nervous, a bit apprehensive about it, and taking a step back and thinking like, am I going to be able to do this? It can be quite a worrying time. There's a lot of changes, and I felt quite nervous when I was going to uni. I'll be super honest. Like there's a lot of changes in your life at that point. You're maybe moving out, you might be staying at home, but you might be moving out to accommodation. You could be living with new people that you've never met before. Like I was so sheltered before I went to uni. Or I wouldn't necessarily say sheltered, but I was very like, I only knew the people that I went to school with. Like I didn't really know many people outside of that. I was quite shy. So the idea of, moving out and living with different people, and even like being in a co-ed dorm, like I went to a single sex school. So, doing that was like quite scary. And, you've got to then pay for a lot more things on your own. You've got to handle the challenges of, especially if you're doing this at like 18, 19, growing up and being an adult and like living on your own, and then also managing, a degree, maybe growing also then your personal life, your social life based on like your preferences of how you want to approach uni. But, it's a big time. Like there's a lot of changes going on. You're also just taking those big next ultimate like life changes in trying to maybe chase after something that's related to the career path that you want to go down, or even just self-discovery. There's a lot of things going on there. And I think that when you then view it and you go, oh, okay, like I need to fit bodybuilding in with all this, it seems overwhelming, but I promise you it's 100% doable. And that's, whether it's just simply bodybuilding in general, like being in, off-season phases or doing mini diets, or whether that's actually undergoing a prep, you can do both. Like I prepped whilst I was at uni, and I've also, bodybuilded whilst I was at uni, just in general. And I feel like I can be an example of that. And there's been a lot of people that I know as well who've done the similar thing. And we obviously have had people on the podcast that have done so. I mean, even a great example is someone like Zena, who, she went and did an extremely difficult degree as well, that took a lot out of her. And if anything, it's made her into an even better athlete and shown how you can manage all of those things simultaneously, and they can actually work really, really well in synergy, which is really important to note. Is like, you can either look at it as something that is impossible and that you can't do and you can't make work, Or you can look at it and you can go, oh, this is an opportunity for me to really assess my weaknesses and see how I can make things more productive, see how I can make things better. And that's a really, really awesome thing to be able to take away from that. And you can just level up all areas of your life, really. And that's what it did to me, having a lot of challenges from this. It really changed so much for me. So I'm excited to get into this. Now, I think the biggest thing to preface when I go into this is that when I talk through, managing bodybuilding or managing how you prep or how you do certain things or how you manage your studies, like there's no right or wrong way of doing this. When it comes to how you want to manage your social life or how much you want to manage your studies or how much you want to manage your bodybuilding journey, like that's completely up to you. You manage it based on the extremity that you want to, and you're going to go into that with a different mindset based on how much that means to you. Like you might be going into uni thinking like bodybuilding is everything to me. That doesn't mean that it's taken away from my life. I just absolutely love it. I want to make sure that yes, I'm doing this degree, but I still want to give my everything to bodybuilding. And the decisions that you then make will be massively influenced by that vision you have. Or you could be going into it and going, I'm so excited for this next, period of life that I've got ahead with university, but I do want to fit bodybuilding into it a little bit, but it's not everything, and that's absolutely fine as well. It's completely dependent upon what you want. And you know what, that might chop and change along the way as well. Like you might go in really hard and then be like, oh, okay, cool, I want to take a step back. Or you might go in a bit more like chill and then realize, oh, okay, I actually want to double down on bodybuilding a bit more. And you can always change what you want to do. So as I go through this, like I say, don't feel like everything that I say is, taken as gospel, or if you have to do something perfectly, because you really don't. You really don't. And I think that if this podcast as well has taught you anything through listening to a variety of different incredible athletes, you see that, so many athletes have gotten to the places that they're at through a multitude of different channels. There's not just one perfect path, otherwise we'd all follow it, we'd all get the same results. There's different paths to take for everyone. So hopefully you can gather that and take that away. But let's kind of start at the beginning when we're looking at going to uni, managing bodybuilding. And the biggest thing we need to look at first, it's like, okay, before we get there, we need to figure out what do we need to actually manage and how we're going to manage them. Like, what are the actual logistics that we need to look at first and foremost? So presuming that you are going to uni, you're moving somewhere different, and you may be going to a different city, you're maybe going to be staying somewhere different. You need to think in advance, like where you're going to train, where you're going to get food, how are you going to get to the gym? Is this going to be feasible from where you live? Like, just look at the logistics before you actually turn up. Because if you literally turn up, or even like a week before you're going, and you have no idea where you're going to train, no idea how you're going to fit all these things in, you're going to be pretty stressed. Like, look at all these things in advance and lower your stress as much as possible. This doesn't mean it has to be perfect. Like, I'm going to be real here. I was really, really on it when I did this. So for me personally, when I went to uni, a large part of my decision in terms of where I went was based around where am I staying, how am I going to get to the gym, what gyms are nearby. But the reason why I did that was because I did have a few options, and to me that's really, really important to my like well-being and my happiness, is being able to train, having somewhere good to train. So that's why I picked the Uni of Sheffield. It's why I picked an accommodation that was a bit quieter, because I didn't want to be staying somewhere that was super loud. And I wanted to make sure that I had, a car parking space so that I could drive to Ultraflex. I really made sure that I could plan out the logistics of these things before I arrived. Like, I looked at the time it would take me to get to the gym from my accommodation at different times of the day. And I just made sure I had an awareness of these things before I showed up, because for me, like, if I got there and I didn't know what I was doing, I would probably have like a moderate panic, I'd be stressed. So to make sure that like I didn't have that, I just planned in advance. And you don't need to do it to that extreme of like mapping everything out. But if you found a school that you're going to, you know where you're going, you know where you're staying, like see what are your options, like where are you going to train? Don't worry about it being like an ultra flex. It doesn't need to be a crazy, like fancy training environment. You can have the local pure gym, you can have your uni gym, you can have something that's nearby, and you can make it work. You can absolutely make it work. Like, if you want to have a good training environment and you want something better, don't be afraid of the sacrifices or the commitment that it takes to do those things, because ultimately it is doable. Like, if you do want to train somewhere that's still really good, if you still want to make sure that you have all of these things in place, and you want to make sure you're like in an accommodation that isn't super super loud and rowdy, like, you can sort those things out if you want to. Just be on it. But if you don't want to, that's also fine. But just figure it all out in advance. Don't let yourself leave these things to last minute, and don't put pressure on yourself for them to be absolutely perfect. So that's the logistical side of things. Now we're going to start to head into what happens when you're there. What happens when you're there? What are the main things that we're going to have to make sure that we are able to manage and we have an awareness of, in order to make sure that you can still have a good, productive experience with your bodybuilding journey? And we're going to talk about this predominantly just in the realms of like normal bodybuilding. We're not going to really talk about prep until the end, because that's a very kind of specific situation and circumstance. We're just going to roll through a few different things that maybe like the biggest challenges or the biggest things to like obviously just be aware of whilst you're at uni, and what this affects outside of just like normal life if you weren't at university. So the first obvious point is, of course, studying. The work itself, completing essays, going to lectures, going to seminars, attending uni, and how on earth do we fit all this in? The biggest and most frustrating thing about university, which if you are going this year, I'm assuming like you'll pretty much have like timetables not far from now. But anyone who's also at uni now will know if you've already been there and you've had a timetable, it is all over the place. Or most courses generally are. Like, your lectures are going to be here, there, everywhere. You're going to be in one place on one day for so much time. The next week, you're not going to be there. You're going to be in a different place at a different time. And it's frustrating. Like, I found it so frustrating because it was so unpredictable. And I love consistency. Like, I love to be in the same place at the same time, know what I'm doing. And I also found it really annoying if sometimes I'd have a lecture that was, at a time that I don't like to work. Like, please don't put a lecture at 6 p.m. because I don't want to be there. Like, sometimes that's going to happen. And this is like the biggest thing to work around, because you're looking at this schedule. You're like, okay, I've got all of these things to attend. I also need to make sure that I'm doing, work outside of this. And then you've also got to train, you've got to eat your meals, and you've got to sleep. And you don't have maybe consistency then, your work schedule. And the reality with this is that it's a lot simpler than you think to get it all organized. And the way that you get it organized is that you just make sure that every day you're not going into the day completely blank. You need to have a huge sense of organization and awareness. So it doesn't need to be crazy, like intense. Like, don't stress yourself out and think everything's got to be organized to the T. And, I need to know exactly what I'm doing at this point here and there. And I need to be like really stressed about it, because you don't. All you need to know is literally sit down, look at the weeks. If you've got a timetable for a good couple of weeks ahead, like, you can sit down with pretty much the whole month. This is what I used to do. I'd sit down with like the whole month. I'd look at when I need to be at certain classes, what assignments I have to do, what piece of work I need to do, what reading I need to do, etc. And I'd literally just map it all out. It would all be mapped out. And then I can start to look at it and I can go, okay, now I need to just figure out on these days, what time am I going to train? On these days, what time am I going to eat? And this would vary a lot. So, the times that I would eat, the times that I would train would be different, from day to day. It would not always be perfect. Sometimes I would train at 5, 6 p.m. The next day I would be up and I would have to train in the morning, before another day of lectures later on in the day, so things might not always be as you think they need to be, in the sense of being like perfectly at the same time every day. But you know what, like, that's okay. You can 100% still fit it all in. The key here is just making sure that you're keeping like that stress super low and you're making it as convenient for yourself as possible. Because ultimately, if you've got that plan ahead of you, all you need to do is execute it. Like, it's absolutely doable. And I think when you take a step back and you really look at your routine, you need to really make sure that, you know, you are ultimately being very, very, very honest with yourself with what you can actually do in that time frame as well. So when you're looking at your days, when you're looking at your week and you're thinking, okay, what do I need to do and how am I going to fit this in? I think we can get into habits of thinking that we can do a lot less than we actually can do, and it's not possible. And I definitely did a much worse job at this in my first year of uni compared to my last year. Now, like, compared to what most people say, my last year of uni was the easiest year at uni compared to my first year, which was the hardest in terms of managing the work and bodybuilding. And that's because my organization skills in my first year absolutely sucked in comparison to what they did in the last year. Now, don't get me wrong. I was organized. I knew what I needed to do day to day. I got my meals in. I got my sessions in. But I was not effective with what I did. In comparison to my last year at uni, when I was really on it, I was also operating like my coaching business at full capacity at that point as well. I was doing other education outside of uni, along with managing my own bodybuilding journey. So I was doing a lot more. And the reason why I was doing a lot more was because I actually sat down with myself and I was like, you know what, I can do more and I can be more organized. You know, that first year at uni, I'd look at my schedule and yes, I knew what I needed to do. But if I didn't need to be at a lecture until 10 a.m., I was waking up at 9 a.m. You know, I was waking up in time to get to that lecture. I was not setting myself a bedtime routine. I was not spending time doing work at the hours that I could be productive. I was maybe going, oh, cool, I can sleep in and do work later. The thing that changed for me after that year was I was like, cool, I need to see what I can do to maximize everything. And this isn't for everyone, but for me, from that point to do all of the work that I wanted to do, you know, inside uni, outside uni, it was a case of being like, I need to be really, really on it. And every day I went, okay, I'm going to have a work block every single day where I can get done what I need to get done. And pretty much every day I woke up between 5 and 6 a.m. and I did a work block from, you know, 6 a.m. until 11, 12 p.m., you know, or whatever time that is, a.m. You know, that was the work time that I used to block out. And it even meant that if I had to be in uni at 9 a.m., I'd done 3 hours of work before I had to go to uni. That was everything done for the day. So then when I finished, I didn't have to do stuff later on. I was able to go and train and I was able to do the things that I need to do and switch off. And it allowed me to do so much more. And that was just something that, quite simply, I wasn't willing to do. I really wasn't willing to do. And it made my life so much easier because I just prioritized my studies. I prioritized doing more and not just letting things slide. So, like, really, really assess what you can, like, genuinely do. You know, there's a huge importance of, like, keeping those variables that you can control really consistent. You know, and the main ones for that, like I've just been through, are going to be your sleep times, your wake times, and your study times. Because then, you know, irrelevant of all the other things that aren't consistent, irrelevant of all the other things that you can't control, which are basically some things that are going to change between the hours of like 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., you know, you can control everything else outside of that. You really can. So don't let that get away from you because it makes a huge difference. You can make every day so much more simple when you, like, know what time you wake up, know what time you go to bed. You have control of those hours. You have control of some study time that you allocate yourself in the day, and you're going to get that work done. And it's going to be so much easier. So that's probably like the biggest tip that I can give that honestly changed my ability to complete my degree alongside my bodybuilding and alongside my other bodybuilding business related endeavors. Like, it just absolutely changed the game big time. So please, 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 that's the number one thing that you do not want to let slip. Because it's very, very easy to let those things get out of hand. And I'll come back to that later on. But let's be honest, even when you've assessed all of these things, even when you've looked at how organized you can be, you know, sometimes it's just not possible to put bodybuilding at the top of the list. It's not. You know, you maybe look at a day where you've got so many lectures, you've got extra ad work you've got to do, you've got more stuff, and no matter how efficient you are with your time, you've just got more that you need to do, and you can't prioritize the things that you usually would do on a much more quiet day. So I think that here you need to learn how to be flexible. You need to learn how to be flexible with your variables. So don't be afraid of like bringing down meal frequency, making your meals more convenient. Don't stress about getting in your same 5 or 6 meals every day, like adopt a different approach that allows you to, have easier meals that you can take on the go, have easier meals that you can take whilst you're out, or if you're in a lab that you can have at a different time. Don't be worried about the timings you have. Make bigger, less frequent meals. Adjust your training as well. Like, don't put pressure on yourself to have this like rolling split. Like, the biggest thing that I see is that with most individuals in uni, like rolling splits rarely work. Rarely, like if you've got a setup that works really well, maybe you can do a rolling split, but the likelihood is that you're going to need a lot more flexibility than that. So often, sometimes having something like a 4-day split across a week where you can pick where you put those 4 days is what works best, because you can then adapt those weeks based on the days that you are going to realistically be able to train. And just really, really don't be afraid of that. Obviously, if you have a coach, you can communicate these things with them, but for yourself, like, you just got to be like a bit more like free with yourself and the things that you do, and just not worrying about things being the same as like your favorite IFBB pro who's maybe just living their life off sponsors. Like, you need to be realistic for what you can do, and also appreciate that like it's not going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. The biggest thing you have to remember is that keeping stress low is the number one. Like, if you can keep stress low, you're on the money. So prioritize that. The main thing that's going to be actually like affected by this is just like in a prep scenario, it's not ideal. It's not ideal to be having to, like, if you can't get meals in or if you can't train, that's not good. But that's why, when you choose to prep is really important. So we'll come on to that at the end. The second thing then, so the first one was studying. The second thing is like social events. And I think that the social life with uni is maybe another really big thing that a lot of young people maybe worry about, because I think there's a lot of stigma connected to having a social life and also being a successful bodybuilder. And I have to be honest with this, like, there's really no right or wrong answer, because there's going to be a lot of variables that affect whether you can or can't have a huge social life, in the sense of like going out very frequently, because a lot of this is like largely going to depend on genetics. And I know that a lot of people won't want to hear it, but there's a lot of people who may promote going out very frequently and having no effects on their bodybuilding journey or their progress. And they may not know it, but a lot of that can be down to genetics and their propensity to just like recover and still build tissue. Whereas, so like, let's say person A goes out, once or twice a week. They take, regular breaks away to festivals, etc., times away from training, and they still make amazing progress. Their performance is rarely affected. They still build a good amount of tissue per year, and they're telling everyone, like, you can have like, you can, not track your macros, and you could do this and that and still make progress. Okay, cool. That's person A. Person B has not got the best genetics. Let's say they've got 5 out of 10 genetics. They try doing that same thing as person A. What they find is that they are not able to recover well to still go in and perform well in sessions. Their performance dips off. Their inconsistency with nutrition, their inconsistent with training, massively affects not only their performance, but their body composition. It also affects their stress levels. So then as a result, their ability to manage bodybuilding, social life, and uni massively diminishes, and then their progress as a whole is ultimately quite affected. So there's obviously a spectrum that lies between person A and person B, but your circumstance does play a huge effect, on how these social events come into play. But at the end of the day, if you want to be person B and you're happy being person B, that's absolutely fine. So there's no like right or wrong here. I'm just saying, don't be influenced by what other people tell you to do, because your decision is ultimately your decision. You want to enjoy yourself, please enjoy yourself. If you want to have time to not do those things and you're quite happy because you don't like them, also cool. So there's two like real perspectives here. So these are the two biggest concerns. The first one is that you're somebody who doesn't want to be pressured by drinking or partying because it's just simply not your thing. It's not your thing, and it doesn't actually like align with you from things in bodybuilding, outside bodybuilding, and you're just happier not doing it. Cool. Concern for person two is they want to enjoy themselves, but they're worried about their progress. So deep down, they really like involving themselves in these social occasions, but they feel like they can't. They feel guilty for doing it because they think that their progress is going to be like really badly affected. So in the first scenario, I think that, like I just said, this should be something that is a choice that you feel aligns with your values and what you want rather than what you think you should be doing. So I don't ever like to hear people say like, oh, I'd love to go to that like event with my flatmates, but I'm not gonna because I know it would make me a bad bodybuilder. Like take those words like back out your mouth. Like do not say those words because it's just not true. It's actually not true. Like for example, like when I was at uni, I didn't go out too much, but I didn't really enjoy it. Like I tried, I tried, but it wasn't my thing, And if I did enjoy it, I'd have done it more. But I don't want people to feel like they can't go out because they think it's going to make them a bad bodybuilder. Because the reality is, it's not. Like it's really not on the grand scheme of things. Like every now and then, if you're going out, maybe what that means is you're basically maybe affecting sleep, you're affecting recovery, and it's maybe a couple nights a month, or in total, that's a few nights across the year. It doesn't make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. It really doesn't. And let's be honest, if you want to look back at your time at university and you want to say, I really enjoyed myself, and you don't want to look back and think that you missed out on these occasions, like don't do that. Please don't do that. Like if that's what you want to do, don't feel like you have to, say no just because you feel like that's what makes you a good bodybuilder, because quite honestly it is a load of BS. Like I said, take it into consideration if you're going a bit wild and you've not got the best genetics to recover from it. But if you are managing it well, and it is literally, like I said, every now and then, you're going on a night out, maybe, like I said, a couple times a month, or, a handful of times across the year, or whatever it may be, if it's not like multiple times a week, you're going to be fine and you can manage that well. Sometimes maybe you might just want to go out and not drink, say you've got a session the next day, or whatever it may be. It's a personal choice. It really, really is a personal choice. It comes down to how you want to treat your bodybuilding and how much you want to involve yourself in different things. Like I actually look back at some things in uni and I wish I'd done more, because whilst I say there's a few things that I didn't want to do, there were a few things that I should have done that I didn't do because I was maybe apprehensive about how that would make me as a bodybuilder, and I was very young and naive at the time. Like say for example, this is the most like silly one, is my flat might go out and they were all going to the pub and they were getting something to eat, and I wouldn't go because I thought, I'll just stay in. And I was quite introverted, to be honest, but I'd say I'll stay in, I'll just have a meal, like my normal meal at home, because I don't know if that makes me a bad bodybuilder, but that was something that really all I needed was somebody to tell me, or to listen to a podcast like this, and to someone to say, Loz, just go and have a nice time and enjoy the time with your mates. Like sometimes you need to hear those things, and it's good for you to appreciate those experiences, because I don't think that you should shelter yourself entirely just because of bodybuilding. But if there is occasions that you don't want to involve yourself in, genuinely just be open and honest with the way that you feel about this towards your flatmates and your friends. Like if they're all going out and they're having a few drinks and you're not interested, don't be afraid to say like, what, I'm actually good. Like I love you guys, but I don't want to come, and I'm all okay. Like don't feel like you kind of have to say yes to certain things if you don't want to. But like I said, when you do want to enjoy those things, like please do, because and I'm quite a big advocate for this with any of my younger guys, because I don't ever want them to think that they can't, because like I said, it's a shame when you look back on it. So that's the social thing into perspective. It's hard for me to kind of talk about it because There's just so many ways that you can look at it and so many circumstances to look at it from. But I think that it's important to just be in touch with what matters to you, be in touch with your values, be in touch with what you enjoy, be in touch with what truly makes you happy. Don't be afraid to try different things, because you never know until you try. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I can give that. So coming away from that, before I kind of talk about that for ages, because as I'm aware with a lot of these topics, I always say this, but I could probably do a whole podcast on its own. So I'm going to veer away from that one. And the next one then is obviously going to be money. Now, money is probably one of the biggest things that a lot of people do concern themselves with when they go to university. And the biggest thing is like just thinking like, am I going to be able to afford bodybuilding? Because everyone says bodybuilding is so expensive. And let's be honest, when you're at uni, money is pretty tight. Like there's not going to be much disposable income available. If you're obviously having tuition to pay for, whether you're paying that through a loan or on yourself, you've then got your living costs. So you're going to be maybe paying for your rent, paying for your food, paying for everything else. There's a lot to be kind of dealt with on that front, paying for travel. And I think that when you look at this from like a bodybuilding side of things and saying, okay, is bodybuilding going to fit into things financially? I think that when you take a step back, the reality of what you actually need to pay for bodybuilding at baseline is not really as much as you think. So let's look at like the foundation, like entry level of bodybuilding from like the financial commitment side of things. You've got food, which I should hope you'd be paying for anyway, which, to be honest, bodybuilding options from a food side of things are actually cheaper than some kind of normal, like quote unquote normal like foods. If you're just buying very, very, very simple foods, like you've got your meats, you've got your carbohydrates, say you've got like pasta, rice, oats, and then you've got maybe if you want to go all out, you can have things like isolate and other meals. But the reality is like the baseline of the things that you need is really, really quite simple, and you can find ways of doing that are going to be more financially feasible as well. So you've got food, as I said, paying for anyway. You've got your gym membership, which, as I said at the start, you can maybe find a big bodybuilder gym, you can find something super local, and that could also be cheaper as well financially. And potentially a coach, you might look to be paying for a coach, which the one thing and the only thing that I will say with a coach is that it may or may not be necessary dependent on where you're at, but always value the return on the investment that you get as a coach. So this is something that you can prioritize based on how much it kind of means to you. But for me personally, this was like the number one thing, like one of the main things at the top of my list, because bodybuilding was very important to me and I wanted to be better. And at the time, like paying for a coach was a big financial commitment, but I sacrificed other things to make that commitment. Like I really just paid for the baseline of things that I needed. I didn't have many like luxuries. Like I didn't buy clothes, I didn't go out for food, I didn't go out for drinks, I didn't buy anything that wasn't like fancy on my plan. Like I couldn't just go to the store and be like, oh wow, I'd love to try this like new nut butter. Like no, I'm gonna buy this standard like Morrison's peanut butter because it's all I can afford. But I want to make sure that I'm paying for my coach because that's really important to me. So it's potentially something you might be paying for, but maybe not like the a necessity on your list. And then of course there's like maybe any travel to the gym. So really you're looking at like food and gym as like a bog standard of what you kind of got to pay for here. And so like I'm saying, it's not as much as you really expect. Like you can get all your food for the week for like 20 or 30 pounds if you're really, really on it and you're just shopping at like the cheapest places. And a gym membership as well can be as cheap as like £15 a month. So it's not as much as you think when you really look at it. I think that a lot of people associate a lot of the expenses with bodybuilding with competing, or to be honest, maybe with just other things that are like not necessarily necessary, like let's say like accessories or fancy supplements or things like that, which as a young natural bodybuilder you don't need those things. Like you really, really don't. You can make do with very, very little and make some really good progress with that for sure. But I think some of the big tips that I would give here would be, like I said, firstly, just prioritize the non-negotiables. and keep that money aside. So look at what you absolutely need to pay for and the things that you want to prioritize paying for. So like I said, like a coach was in that non-negotiable list for me. So there was about like what, 250 pounds a month that went towards my bodybuilding. And that was like non-negotiable, like total, that's all of it. And then I had the rest of it to deal with anything else that I needed to pay for. Be really smart, be really, really smart with where you're spending money, and buy cheaper options of things. Like I just said, don't be buying like the fancy nut butters. It might be a case that you need to get like the store's own brand, or like make sure you're shopping at places like Aldi or Lidl in the UK. I know that there's different options of that in different countries, but like find the places that are going to give you the cheaper options rather than being like silly with your money. Like plan out your shops so that you can get like offers, that you can get things all in one, so you're not having to do multiple shops and end up paying more money for certain things. Get things in bulk, and like maybe get them from the butchers, or do things that are going to be cheaper there. And ultimately, like, be a bit tight with your money. Like I said, like money is probably going to be tight, so you need to be tight with what you've got available. Really assess what you actually need, what you actually don't need, and what really adds up. This is where the luxuries do really need to be considered. When you haven't got a huge amount of money, you maybe can't be looking at getting like new clothes, or getting new things for your room, or getting this or that. And this is the reality of like where, like I've just talked about, like social occasions really comes into it. Because what used to baffle me was, I used to have a lot of flatmates and friends at uni asking me, how I could afford to, like go to the gym and have a coach and, buy all the food that I bought, which in the grand scheme wasn't that much. When they'd go out on a night and they'd spend the entire amount of money that I would spend on food for a month, they would spend in one night of drinking. So these things really, really add up. And it's honestly like a big part of why when I was at uni, like I said, I didn't really go out very much. I had very few off-plan meals, not because I didn't necessarily want them, but because I couldn't really afford it. Like food was super simple. I actually worked at Ultraflex for a period of time so that I could have some additional money, but I also got my membership for free for a good period of time while I worked there. So there's things that you can do to make it easier and to actually just manage things a bit better on that front. So definitely just take all of those things into consideration. So that's the main things from like a money side of things. The next thing I'm going to move on to is the possibility of living with other people, and or potentially like just living away from home. This is where sometimes you might find communicating your journey with bodybuilding with other people potentially like it's either going to be difficult, or it's going to be something that you're nervous about. And the biggest thing that a lot of people worry about is like the resistance of this, because especially at a young age, it's not necessarily something that a lot of people understand. And I definitely felt, as like a female as well, explaining that to a lot of people, I didn't necessarily feel, I mean, yeah, I felt embarrassed, I felt nervous, I didn't know what people were going to say. But education really is everything. When it comes to how your days need to look, what it's going to be like when you have your meals, and there's probably going to be a lot of questions and a lot of people saying, oh, why do you do that, or that's silly, or that's stupid, or why don't you drink, that's boring, or whatever it is. But just educate and just kind of like be honest with what it's like. And I really just kind of like laid it on the line with everyone when I first moved in, and I said, like, this is the way I am. Like, I don't drink, I don't really go out, but that's aside from bodybuilding anyway. And this is something I do. And you know what, people are often way more supportive than you think they are. I think we often like to think that people, not in a bad way, but people care way more than they do, and the most part people don't really care. So don't be afraid to just tell people. And a lot of people are usually just like quite intrigued by it. Like people think it's interesting. So the more that you can be like come from an educated education side of things when you talk about it, rather than being really defensive or being really arrogant about it. Like, don't be like that, because people won't like you. Like, they won't like bodybuilding if you talk about it like that either. So, firstly is like, just like be honest and lay on the line with the people that you are around. And when you live in a shared space, this is kind of crucial. You don't want to honestly, you don't want to be a dick about it, because you can't be saying like, oh, you don't come in here because I'm cooking, or, like, can you guys like not put music on because I want to go to sleep? Like, you can't really be like that, because you share the space with the people. So you have to have mutual respect. But like, do be honest with things if like something does bother you. Like if somebody's like taking your food, which sometimes happens, or if they're doing something really frequently and like you can't sleep or whatever it is, like, don't be afraid to kind of stand your ground, because at the same time, like I said, it's mutual respect. So you got to make sure that it goes both ways. So that's the first thing with obviously like living with the other people. Another thing with like living with other people or being away from home is that you're now in this new environment, which just generally is something that I think you can manage, but bodybuilding kind of helps me here to have a better perspective on this, because obviously as a bodybuilder, you're paying more attention to like physical health, like mental health, like sleep routines, work routines, etc. And this is something that I did a really poor job with for a while. It was how I managed living in a single room. So obviously if you're in a house or if you're in a flat, you're just in like one room, like pretty much all the time. Yes, you might have a shared space, but maybe you don't spend a lot of time in there. Maybe you don't really like going in there, but be really careful for like your physical and mental health with how much time you spend in your room and what you do in your room. So make sure that you're taking like regular breaks from your room. Try not to spend eternity in there, because like mentally, physically, you're not going to feel great from doing that. And specifically, like when you're in your room, be really mindful of like where you're eating, where you're working, where you're doing these things, because like the worst thing I noticed was like my digestion was not good, my focus for work was not good, my sleep was not good. And the reason why was because like I would sit in my bed and I would maybe do work in my bed sometimes. I would eat in my bed sometimes, because I literally had a bed and a desk. And, I'd be like working and then I'd get straight into bed and I'd expect to go to sleep. I've literally just been like working 2 inches away from that, a minute earlier. So you've got to create separation in this space as much as you can do. Like do as much as you can, like at your desk in your room if you have a desk. Spend as much time outside of your room if you can do. Make sure that you're dedicating like your bed for sleeping, your desk for working, or your desk for eating, or your kitchen for eating. Like separate these things rather than getting them all mixed up, because that will really, really affect like work productivity, sleep quality, and eating like and digestion quality as well. So really make sure that you stay on the top of those things, because you can definitely get yourself into a bit of a spiral with that. And that kind of like leads me on to the final point, which is just like the routine aspect. Like, given you're in that kind of environment, it's easy to let your routine absolutely suck at uni. And mine was definitely like that in the first year. And don't get me wrong, you live and learn, but it will let you down hard if you really, really, really let your routine like just completely drop off. Like I mentioned at the start, if you have no sleep routine, you have no awareness of like your eating habits, your working habits, not in the sense that you don't know like what you're eating, but like if you're eating, like I said, like in bed, or you're just kind of lounging around and you're not paying attention to like how you eat or how you work or how you sleep and when you sleep, like all these things make such a huge difference. So I think that when you're literally just looking at sleep, eating, work, like you can break these down and you can make sure they're a bit more productive and effective. Don't let it slip away so much. Like, don't get me wrong, you can pull it back if you need to, but just be aware of them. Like a lot of people at uni have horrible routines, like really, really, really horrible. And I think that in general, like irrelevant of bodybuilding, it's so good for you to have a much better routine. Like pull bodybuilding out of the picture. Like if you improve your routine at uni, like you're going to do better in your degree. You're going to probably have better mental health. You're going to also have probably better physical health as well, because you're not going to spend all day just kind of like sat in bed, like look after yourself first and foremost. Like that's always important. But then obviously put that in combination with bodybuilding. Is that going to improve your bodybuilding outcomes? Because you're probably going to recover better. You're going to have better sessions as a result of that. And you're going to be more focused in your sessions. You're probably going to have not terrible, like actually okay insulin sensitivity, because you won't be just laid down in bed all day. Like, actually pay attention to these things, because it is easy for them to slip off, especially if you are in that kind of environment. It makes a huge difference. Just hold yourself accountable, and like be honest as well if you do work with a coach, if you notice yourself slipping into any of these things as well, because it can make a huge difference with your progress, and also how you feel about your progress as well. So those are really like the main things to kind of go through. And I know I'm already 45 minutes in at this point, but I did just want to touch very very quickly on like a prep specific scenario whilst you're at uni, because I think this is something that you do really need to consider if you're thinking about prepping whilst you're at uni. So firstly, like I just said, really think about it, like really consider it, if it's the right thing for you to do. And I think it makes a massive difference with the year that you choose to prep. Like, are you choosing to do that in your first year versus your final year? Like, that makes a huge difference. And it's the same, goes in like normal life. Like, the year that you prep is not just something that you select based on where your physique is at. It's something that you select based on where life is at. So when you compare like your first year, where for most universities, like that is just a pass or fail year, comparative to your final year, which contributes to a large percentage of your final result and your outcome, like you need to think about what's going to work best for you, and also with how that affects your specific work rate, how you can manage your stresses during that diet phase, and also just your overall, maybe like your enjoyment of that final year. Because say you're somebody who thinks, what, like it actually works well for me because I work better when I'm in prep, and I can handle my stresses really well, but maybe you want to make sure that you actually are still present in that final year. Like there's so many different things to consider, but just make sure that you think about whether it's right for you. But if you have made the decision to do so, just know what the important things are you need to like consider. So you're going to have probably a cutback on social events, you're going to have lower energy, lower mood, potentially poor focus, the increasing demand to prioritize your recovery variables, which, like I've just mentioned, can be affected by like your living environments or your work demands. So even more intense management realistically is going to be necessary. Do be really careful of letting yourself slip into those poor habits like we managed, and really take a hold of like that energy prioritization is going to be everything. So with your energy being low, you need to prioritize where you put that energy. Your routine's going to need to be more on it than anything. Like for example, if you're managing prep and exams, you really really can't neglect strict time management, because you're going to need to find a routine that allows you to like say your exams, that allows you to still get your meals in, that allows you to still study, to still get productive sessions, to still get your cardio done, to still get your steps done. Like there's a lot to think about, so make sure that you're not neglecting those things. So I don't want to talk about this for too long, because I think that 99% of you probably clicked off at this point, but hopefully I've talked about a few things. I really just wanted to ramble off some thoughts and run through my experience. And I think that the biggest takeaway you can carry from this is that there's definitely no right or wrong way to do anything. There are things you can do to make it easier, but just like many other things, and I said this at the start, being busy in work, being busy in life, like bodybuilding works extremely well in synergy with these things. So don't think that because you're suddenly, doing a degree, you've got these changes, that it's going to make it like harder. It could potentially make it easier, because when it's approached in the right ways, you can learn how to make things. And I think bodybuilding teaches you how to make things extremely productive, to be more mindful of how you approach things, to be more mindful of making things extremely efficient, to make things more enjoyable, to make things more progressible, and to give you that opportunity to chase for self-development. That's what it really taught me. I started really taking my bodybuilding seriously at the start of uni, and I have just completely I completely transformed across those 3 years, from that first year to then being in my final year, where I was, even deeper into my bodybuilding journey. I'd matured. I'd learned so much more from that. I'd cross transferred that into my university degree, and then into, of course, what that taught me was the other areas of life, and it's what allowed me to then build up my coaching business and everything I have here alongside it. So let those things work in synergy, and they absolutely can do. Like, if you want to take a positive outlook on it and get a lot out of it, I promise you, you can absolutely do it. And if anyone's got any specific questions, I've tried to cover a few of the things that I got on Instagram across this specific podcast. So hopefully that's been helpful. But like I say, if anybody's got any further sort of questions or any concerns, like that a bit more personal maybe, just let me know and pop me a message. I'm always happy to talk about absolutely anything, and I love to help wherever I absolutely can do. So yeah, hopefully this episode has been helpful. Again, thank you so much to anyone who does listen. You're absolute legends, and it just means the world to me to be able to even put my voice out there and have my little rambles, and for people to listen as well. So if you have liked the episode, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, rate as always. If you want to find out more about the podcast, make sure to check out the Instagram, check out my Instagram. If you're interested in finding out more about my coaching, I do have coaching spaces available. So you can either pop myself a message, or you can inquire through the link in my bio or on the Team LV Fit coaching page as well. And I will get in touch with you there, and we can have a bit of a discussion about your goals. But as I said, thank you so much for listening, guys, and I will be back with another episode next week.